Hello guys and gals and welcome to Rauta. This time it's a black metal worst best with a Swedish black metal act, Armagedda. Armagedda did only 4 albums, but what matters more than quantity is of course quality the band put through during their years. And I was recently told, just to be secure, just to be straight with it, there is no comeback for the band, even though their 4th album came quite late to the party, but that's a different story. But without further words needed, let's take a look at Armagedda, which, technically speaking, started around 2000. And this was only 2 guys' band. Later on, they have ventured to other genres and styles and different bands. As you can see, A. Pettersson has the Arma, which is more like Swedish version of Depeche Mode and the like, I guess. He has Saiva and Stilla and some other band like Lundom in the past, which are more folkier, more like nature-driven bands in metal and beyond. Not exactly folk metal, but kind of into that territory. I have reviewed some of those stuff, and well, he still is good in his music and all that stuff. The other guy in the band was Grav, who had and still has bands such as Elder, and also worked in Lundom with Pettersson. And these 2 guys, they have some magnificent chemistry, at least in terms of Armagedda and, well, Lundom as well. And having bands like Leak and Elder, they all make this kind of a triangle, if you will. I mean, on the other hand, there are these bands like Saiva and Stilla, which are very much nature-driven. Also, Lundom kind of makes part of that whole triangle kind of thing. But then again, Leak and Elder, and especially Armagedda, are more on the raw end of black metal. And whereas some of those bands are very much, like I said, nature-driven, Armagedda is like violent and hateful entity of themes which are more kind of typical in black metal, such as, here listed on Metal Archive site, occultism, anti-Christianity, death, evil, darkness. I mean, you have the whole deal. And of course, Armageddon, genocide, things like that are often gone through as topics throughout the whole thing here. But anyway, this band burned pride with their very, very short career. I mean, essentially what we are staring here are these years 2000 to 2004. And those were the years during which Armageddon made most of their stuff. And pretty much everything after that, well, it's a different story, even though there are releases after that, but these are not so much like the main era of the band, if you will. So, 3 albums, the final were approaching in 2001, which was my gateway back in the days to Armageddon. That started it, was continued with Only True Believers in 2003, and then Und Spiritism Djävulen Skalder Anno Serpenti MM4 or 2004. I mean, if you really think about it, 3 albums within a span of 3 years, that's quite of a thing. And in 2020 they had this album Svindeldjup at the Stoop. I've reviewed more or less all of them during my years now, of course, to Rauta, because Rauta didn't exist back in 2004, but that's a different story. Once again, we don't really need to talk about that. The thing here is, this new album doesn't mean the band is back. It's not going to be, and that's why I asked the man of the band, like, hey, what's going on with that? But Armagedda is buried. Still, some people think it's, active because these kind of old rotten bones have been dug up from the ground and, put out as an album. So 4 albums, this should be quite easy to rank. I mean, it's not like there's a fierce competition or lots of albums to talk about. But before we go to the actual ranking, I guess it's worth mentioning that the final were approaching and Only True Believers are a little bit different breed in terms of music style than these 2 that came after those. And the thing here is, they started with really, really warlike, raw, kind of almost like primitive black metal, which is very, very Dogthronian in the way I'm talking about the golden era of Dogthrone, early or mid-90s. But later on it became more like organic in sound and feel, like somewhat semi-acoustic guitars are put into the play with the third album, and also the whole production, the soundscape, if you will, changed with the third album. So it seems like the band basically had two phases there. Two not so original but kind of a raw ones, and then becoming more mystic but also organic with the second albums. And even though there's this big span of time between the albums 3 and 4, I got the impression that actually the material is quite old, and as such these are closer to each other than what you might figure out from the years between. Now let's take also a look on Radio Music side, because it has more ratings in general and reviews than Metal Archives. Gives you a little bit better oversight how these albums have been welcomed in the past by different people. I rather use Radio Music versus Metal Archives when it comes to giving a quick overlook about the albums. Something that I haven't done in the past so much, but later years I've started to get a little bit annoyed how biased Metal Archive review scores tend to be, especially with the classics, and you kind of get totally weird feeling because it's more like fans writing reviews rather than different kind of people just rating the albums, if you know what I mean. So here we have a very different take on the album ratings versus Metal Archives when it comes to that, and also more rating scores given. So this gives a more fair approach to the albums. Like Final Word Approaching is here rated as the weakest, 3.26. And the thing here is this goes from basically from 0 to 5. I think technically speaking it's like 0.5 to 5, but that's enough scale we need to know about it. And Only True Believers is here rated as the best with 3.55. So if you really think about it, 2.5 is the middle path, and everything beyond 3 especially is more or less something like liked or good. And this gives you a little bit of a good idea. If you're closer to 4 on average with an album, I would say it's definitely better than how it looks. I mean, people tend to see like, oh, it's only 3.5. How come on? It's not that bad. I mean, it should be 4.5. But we're talking about average scores here. So it's always a little bit different than your personal fan opinion or mine. But interestingly, it's kind of cool to see that the first one is the weakest, the second one is the best, and the ratings between these two go for albums 3 and 4. Now back to Metal Archives. If I were to just put it into my ranking and describe these different styles, how I would say worst to best, I would say actually the newest one, Svindelljubs Ättestup, that came out in 2020, is the weakest one. It's not weak by no means. For me, it's a solid 8 out of 10. And the thing here is why I would be putting it on top, as the spot 4, not on the top 4. The thing here is, it's not really a big improvement from Un Spiritism, but more like a little brother to it. The thing here is, the style is basically the same. There's semi-acoustic guitar parts and some organic feeling. And by organic, I mean less raw, less electrified, if you know what I mean, with strong distortion and all that stuff that dominated the first 2 albums. But Svindelljubs Ättestup is more like solid with no weak points, but a little bit of filler-like material here and there versus the better ideas the band also had on all of these albums. So actually the competition for me is quite fierce because there are no mediocrity on this band. I mean, there are no parts that I feel like why that was done, especially when we're talking about the albums. They are the EP like I Am, which I guess is the weakest compared to the albums, but when you're talking about the actual albums, I would say all of them are good versus great, or between that scale. Now, third spot would be, in my books, Un Spiritism, and there was a little bit of balancing for me whether I would pick for the third place Un Spiritism or Final War Approaching. And the reason is this: at the same time I find a Final War Approaching a little bit of an original, because it's kind of so dark-throaty and it's almost like a worship album in so many ways. But at the same time, it's also so much more fierce, hateful and barbaric, which then again speaks to me in ways that a lot of bands don't do. I mean, they're a bunch of really nice and cool and great black metal bands, but they are almost like too cool. I mean, they are too nice. They have great production, they're melodic, and they're almost like, good mood music. Whereas the final album approaching is very raw. So compared to that, Unspiritism, which takes spot number 3, is a little bit warmer and it's a little bit more nature driven because of the organic sounds, the guitars and all that stuff. And at the same time, it's a little bit more original, not so basic, if you will. But it lacks the rawness and fierceness which the final war approaching has. So for me, it was really, really hard competition to figure out whether I would pick the debut album for the second or third spot. But they are, like I said, all really good albums. And that leads to the winner, Only True Believers. Why this is the best Armagedda album needs a little bit of explaining. Like I said, it was also that on Radio Music, but for me it is because here the songwriting takes a little bit more original and less of a copycat feeling versus the Final War album. And the songwriting is kind of a more fierce. It's not as raw, and as such, I think the almost perfect balance has been reaching versus being very primitive, very raw, very lo-fi in terms of production. It's still having those super great raspy black metal vocals, which I think Armagedda really, really nails. I mean, they are among the best black metal vocals. I mean, I'm a sucker for vocals such as Nocturno Culto from Darkthrone or Satyr from Satyricon, but Armagedda is one of those that kind of has this, bestial raspiness. It's not your typical basic screaming, but it's kind of more monster-like. And for me, that is the perfect thing because they sound so animalistic in a way. The thing here is, it's just perfection when it comes to vocals. The production is really, really good. Raw, powerful, fierce, inhuman if you will, but still making a lot of sense in this kind of music. And having these 44 minutes of music, I mean, it's really, really well done of an album. So I'm very close to these review scores and average here on Metal Archives in terms of how I would rate it. Closer to 9 than 8. So yeah, really, really good Swedish black metal album. If I had to compare Armagedda to some other bands, which are luckily still active, I guess Kraft would be the other one. I mean, my focus on Swedish black metal, that is after Bathory and maybe Dissection in a way, of course, are bands like Armagedda, Kraft and Arcanum, all very raw and they're fierce in their ways of doing black metal and, not just, the basic kind of a thing, but raw and not afraid of exploring a little bit further in the style without actually being very simplistic one-trick ponies. All in all, it's kind of a shame that Armagedda didn't last more than this very short span of time, but I think that is also the reason why it was so good. They burned Pride for a short amount of time and that's it. And then it was done. No need to repeat it or see them going diluted, but just delivering the point of that era in these guys' worlds. And then there were other bands that would, get the torch passed on to, and that's it. So if you have missed this great band from Sweden earlier on, there is a good way always come to back. I was actually listening to these for these review purposes on Spotify while driving, while at the gym, while doing stuff outside. It works for me so well, and I'm happy that it's actually out there on streaming services. I mean, I have them on CDs, but that's not really playable when I'm on the go. So I'm happy that the music is right there, and because I have them on physical product, I'm not saying like, hey, add these to my cart, I'm going to buy them. I already have them. But there it is. Give a look onto Armagedda. You have links provided in the description box and start listening to it. I hope you find it satisfying and maybe you already know the band. If you do, let me know in the comment section how you feel about Armagedda, which ones are your favorite, and so on. Now it's time to go. See you soon with more Rauta content coming your way. Take care.